Hey everyone, today we are joined by Matt Hougan. He's CIO at Bitwise Asset Management to talk all things crypto, Bitcoin, and of course what to expect with an incoming new Trump administration. Matt, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you can't be involved with the financial markets and not pay attention to the incredible growth we've seen in BTC's pricing since Election Day. Matt, what do you think Donald Trump's presidential win here in the States last week means for the future of Bitcoin and crypto overall?
Yeah, it's a massive game changer for the crypto industry. You have to think about this industry having spent the past 4 years with one hand tied behind its back, faced very aggressive regulatory prosecution, a lack of regulatory clarity, and now all those headwinds have turned into tailwinds. Trump and the Republican Congress overtly pro-crypto. We'll see regulatory clarity. We'll see new legislation. We may even see the U.S. building its own Bitcoin strategic reserve pile. It's like we've gone from 10 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour. That's why Bitcoin's at its all-time high and why we're optimistic about where we go from here.
We'll get to the reserve in just a second. We had a bit of breaking news. This just broke right before you popped on, and I just want to get your perspective on it. This comes from Fox Business, who says 18 U.S. states have filed to sue the SEC and its commissioners, of course, including Gary Gensler, accusing them of unconstitutional overreach and unfair persecution of the crypto industry. Obviously, it's the type of lawsuit we're still going to learn a lot more in the hours and days ahead. But give me your perspective. Any surprise here, especially after the election? These are Republican states. These are Republican state attorneys general, clearly matching the frustration that you expressed with Gary Gensler and his role at the SEC.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how those turn out. I do think it's reflective of the time. This industry has been persecuted for the past 4 years. There's been lawfare and a lack of regulatory clarity. And that's really set the U.S. back from a crypto perspective. A lot of crypto innovation moved overseas. So I think that lawsuit is sort of reflective of the level of frustration that the crypto industry and supporters of innovation have felt. And it's a sign that we're going to be exiting that era and moving into a new era. So interesting to see.
Are you confident Gensler will soon be out of a job?
Look, if you look back at any change of administration, it's typical for the chair of the SEC to turn over and for the new administration to appoint their lead. I would expect that to be true here. It's probably double true since Trump has promised to, quote unquote, fire Gary Gensler, but that is completely par for the course. And it's worth noting that the chair is really important. They set the agenda and the tone and the tenor at the SEC. We're hopeful that we get more dialogue, more open thought, more ways to protect investors. I think that's a really important point. When you get regulatory clarity, it's not a free-for-all. It just means that there are rules of the road. So good projects are separated from bad projects and investors have an easier way of approaching the market.
There have been so many people in the crypto community, Matt, you know better than I do. They were so frustrated with Gensler's inability to simply define what is a security, what is a commodity, what are the rules of the road. Don't hold us accountable and accuse us for breaking rules that you have not clearly defined. What sort of SEC policies do you think could change in a presumably imminent post-Gary Gensler world?
Yeah, I mean, just think about that for a second. You had the SEC and the CFTC who wouldn't agree on how to classify the second largest crypto asset in the world. That is the kind of lack of regulatory clarity that the industry has battled through. I think we'll see three big changes shortly out of the gate. One that we expect to see relatively early is a stablecoin rule passed through Congress to bring stablecoins into a fully regulated setting. I think that market could go from about $200 billion to $500 billion or more in the year to come. That's all built on Ethereum and therefore good for the Ethereum ecosystem. Specific to the SEC, I think they'll quickly change rules to allow Wall Street banks to operate more easily in the crypto industry. They've been restricted from doing things like custody and trading. I expect that changes almost immediately. I think we will eventually get market structure rule that solves that question you raised, what's a security and what's a commodity, and that will unleash innovation. And then importantly for investors, we're going to see much more dialogue around what we can do in an ETF wrapper. We've seen what Bitcoin ETFs have done in terms of helping people gain safe, low-cost access to that space. I'm hopeful that with new tenor, we'll see new investments unlock there as well.
What does all that mean for Bitcoin's pricing, which is now up 100% year to date?
Yeah. Look, I think we're still very early in Bitcoin. I think until Bitcoin is the same size as the gold market, so you're talking $400,000 or $500,000 a coin, maybe more, until we get to that point, Bitcoin is still the challenger asset. It's still maturing. This change in a regulatory setting from Bitcoin going from sort of persona non grata to having a level playing field is going to help Bitcoin mature and be accepted globally as a institutional store of value asset. And if that happens, there's no guarantee that will happen, but if that happens, you're talking about Bitcoin priced in the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think that's what this change is doing. Institutions that were afraid to invest in Bitcoin last year because of the regulatory overhang, that's been removed. Now they can evaluate this asset on its merits. As you said, it's been performing exceptionally well. I think many will allocate, and I think the price will go higher.
Well, we've now had, I don't remember when the spot Bitcoin ETFs were rolled out by Grayscale and others. It was about a year ago, within the last year or so. What has that done, in terms of, from your perspective, in terms of kind of pricing? I know there were kind of warring voices and factions saying, well, on the one hand, it gives it, a much higher perception of legitimacy that could move up the price. On the other hand, you're encouraging a system where people could still make money off the asset without directly owning the underlying asset itself. So now that we've had several months, we've had quite a while now in this world of the spot Bitcoin ETFs, how do you kind of diagnose how things have gone so far?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's been strictly a net good. These ETFs have been the most successful ETFs of all time. They've pulled in about $30 billion in assets, and they've used that to go out and directly buy Bitcoin. So while end investors just own the ETF does in fact own the Bitcoin. And I think that's contributed to price. Look, when the ETFs launched, in January, Bitcoin was trading around $50,000. Now we're at 90 and thinking about 100. A lot of that you can attribute to ETFs making it easier for new investors to onboard into this market. I think they've been a major winner.
You mentioned at the start of our interview the strategic reserve. I know that Senator Cynthia Lummis, a Republican out of Wyoming, she's got her own version of a bill. This was talked a lot about by Trump and many others at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville earlier this year. Are you in support of an idea like that? And really more directly, Matt, a lot of questions out there about how would this even work? What would this look like?
Yeah, I think at the start, what the U.S. can and should do is not sell the Bitcoin that it has, right? The U.S. has 200,000 Bitcoin that it seized back from Silk Road. I think we should keep that and hold that just as a down payment. What if Bitcoin really does become an institutionally, globally important means of transacting? We want to have an anchor and a piece in that. Lummis has suggested the U.S. acquire 1 million Bitcoin. I think that would be an interesting statement that we want this important industry to be headquartered here on U.S. shores. And so I personally would be supportive of that. But big picture, what I like to point out to investors is just how amazing it is that we're having this conversation, right? 2 years ago, it was Sam Bankman-Fried on the cover of every magazine, and you couldn't touch crypto. Now, sitting U.S. senators and presidential candidates and elected presidents are talking about a national stockpile of Bitcoin. It shows you how fast things can change. It shows you the trajectory Bitcoin is on. And I think whatever version of it we get, it's going to be another major unlock for this asset.
Do you think that would be the type of thing in terms of, again, perceived legitimacy that could further boost the price? I think a lot of what I've read from the community is a bit split as to whether or not crypto diehards would actually be in favor of the federal government having such an active role in terms of owning that as an asset.
Yeah, I think it would be very positive for price. What you don't want to see is the U.S. government owning a controlling portion of Bitcoin or a very large pool of Bitcoin. But you look at the gold market, and governments around the world own about 22% of gold. That'd be, 4 or 5 million Bitcoin. And gold seems to function as a non-sovereign store of value. The important thing is that ownership is distributed. At 1 million Bitcoin for the US, I think we would feel comfortable. It's still a distributed, globally owned asset. And it's still core to its true principles. And for sure, 1 million Bitcoin in new demand would be supportive for the Bitcoin price. So I think it's a win-win actually for the market.
Do you have a price target for BTC for the end of 2024, I wonder?
Yeah, I think we could approach, challenge, and maybe even get over 100K on Bitcoin. It's going to be a challenge. There'll be people who are willing to sell at that level. It's a natural behavioral sell level. But I think Bitcoin wants to get there and test it and see if it can break out above that level.
Yeah, certainly not for the faint of heart. I mean, we've already seen it. It's down 2% on the day you and I are having this conversation. But I don't know, if we were to have this conversation 3 hours from now, it could be a wildly different story. To the point about the SEC and kind of a broader regulatory changes, obviously we're talking a lot about the, I guess, soon to be official, who actually knows, Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. Give me your sense on what that looks like, and especially perhaps putting Elon Musk in a position to kind of regulate the regulators, including the SEC. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there are a couple of good things that are coming out of that idea. For one, I think every American would agree there are parts of the government that are inefficient. That just seems like a truism. We can go in and shake it up. That's a net win. The other thing I would point out is one thing you can think of Elon's ascendancy is this new generation of people who grew up native to crypto are now stepping into positions of power. We are seeing an age shift in our leadership. And as you do that, you put more crypto native or crypto comfortable people into positions of power. I think that's a huge win for the market. So, whether it's just making government more efficient or indicative of a new generation coming to power that understands this technology and has seen it grow and believes in it, I think it's a positive in that way as well.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say the incoming 119th United States Congress will be by far the most crypto savvy House and Senate that we've ever had. That was not the case when I was covering Capitol Hill back in 2017. You couldn't find many members of Congress who knew enough about the topic to confidently speak about it on the record. That has really shifted, and I think it's going to be a really exciting time for people who like that sort of news and want to hear, to your point, what a new generation of leaders have to say. Any other regulatory changes you're looking forward to or anticipate in the crypto space under Donald Trump and Republican control come January 20th?
Yeah, I think that market structure bill will be absolutely critical. I think the stablecoin bill will be a massive unlock. And then the other thing is just the end of lawfare against the crypto industry. If you've been in this industry or thinking about getting into this industry, you had this sort of regulatory threat hanging over you where you didn't even understand where the lines are. And that's been really challenging for people. So I think removing that will unleash a wave of innovation. I think it's going to be pretty significant, and it'll be fun to watch.
Matt, you've talked a lot about 401ks, not really being able to invest directly in crypto. Talk to us about the why. What's kind of the background or context to that? And do you see that being a rule that could be overturned?
I'm glad you bring that up. It's hard to remember all these rules that have been put in place.
For sure.
You did have the Department of Labor come out in March of 2022 and exercise extreme caution to any 401k provider that added Bitcoin to the investment options. It even said it would audit any provider that did so, which is an extraordinary threat from a non-investment related regulator to make. It's worth noting since that point, Bitcoin's up about 125%. So you can thank your regulators for protecting you from that. But this would be a massive unlock if we could simply remove that note of extreme caution and allow Bitcoin to sit side by side with other assets. There's $8 trillion in 401k plans. Right? $8 trillion. If you think about 1% of that moving into the Bitcoin or crypto market, that is more than we saw from the ETFs by a significant fraction. And then even more importantly, Americans save every month in their 401ks. And so if a small portion of that went into a well-diversified portfolio, but included crypto, you could see a persistent bid for crypto in the coming years in the same way you see a persistent bid for stocks. To me, it's mostly about letting investors access the investments they want on a fair footing. I would love to see that DOL warning rolled back and Bitcoin just be treated like any other asset.
Matt, I don't know if you're a sports fan, but a lot's being made right now about one of our favorite old receivers from the New York Giants, Odell Beckham Jr. When he signed his contract for the Rams, he took a portion of it in Bitcoin. And he is quite literally, in more ways than one, spiking the football in the last week, saying, people thought I was foolish for doing this. Is that something you might even expect more to see? People in the world of sports kind of negotiating contracts that are increasingly Bitcoin or cryptocurrency friendly. given that a few high-profile names are willing to do it, and at least so far, so good.
He's done very well. Russell Kung, another one who took Pay Me in Bitcoin and is happy right now. Look, big picture, what are they looking at? They're looking at a system in the US that has $36 trillion in debt, that's adding $1 trillion in debt every 90 days. And they're saying, I want a portion of my wealth to be outside of that system. Because if that kind of debt accumulation keeps going and keeps piling up, something bad is going to happen. So I think whether it's people being paid directly or people just making sure they have 5 or 10% of their portfolio that's exited that system, which has that existential debt threat, I think you're going to see many more people do that, particularly since the reputational overhang has been removed, right? When those folks said, pay me in Bitcoin, you didn't have Stan Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones saying, I like Bitcoin in this environment. Now you do. So of course, that number is going to go up. The number of companies buying Bitcoin is going to go up. There are a lot of tailwinds in this industry right now.
So to that point, Matt, you got a lot of people out there who are thinking, man, you know what? It's one thing if I missed the hype train on NVIDIA. Did I miss the hype train on Bitcoin? It's already priced at 90,000. What would you say to someone who has not yet gotten in, who might be considering this, listening to our conversation and wondering about an easing of regulatory burdens come the new year?
Yeah, really, I'd say 2 things. One, I still think we're very early in Bitcoin. As I mentioned, until it's the same size of gold, which is to say $500,000 to $1 million, I think it's still developing and still trying to be accepted as an institutional asset. So you're still ahead of the largest institutions. There's no guarantee we get there, but that's the direction Bitcoin is trying to travel. The other thing I would say, however, is on the reverse side, which is this is still an extremely volatile asset. It goes up, it goes down in very large amounts. You mentioned it's down 2+% a day. That's a completely normal day. And what that means for investors, if you're allocating, is, from my perspective, you want to take a long-term buy and hold perspective to Bitcoin. I don't know where it's going to go next week or the week after that. Who knows? And you want to size your portfolio appropriately. Again, when you get these really volatile assets, if you put a lot of your portfolio into it, you experience a great deal of risk. Many institutional investors are doing 1 to 5% of their portfolio. So if you're going to do it for the long term and size it appropriately.
Bitwise filed for an XRP ETF last month. Talk to me about the opportunities that you see in that project, and what do you most want people to know?
Yeah, sure. So I can't talk about our filing specifically because it's with the SEC, but I can talk about XRP and Ripple. If you think about that project, it's been a blockchain with significant community and significant technology that's functioned for many years. The company Ripple has done a lot of corporate development work in and around that space. And from my perspective, we don't know what XRP and the XRP blockchain can do in a fairer regulatory environment. The SEC has a famous lawsuit against Ripple and XRP that has been moving along for multiple years. Ripple seems to be doing well in that lawsuit, but it's sort of shackled XRP and the real world use cases of that blockchain. I think if we can get a fair regulatory footing, we could see what that can do. There are plenty of large financial services companies that are building on the XRP blockchain or interacting with that space. And I'd be excited to see what happens if that gets unlocked.
Matthew Hougan is the CIO at Bitwise Asset Management. Matt, I hope you come back. I hope we can continue to have this conversation, not just through the kind of lame duck transition period, but man, once we're off and rolling with a new look Congress in January, these conversations will be front and center. I got no doubt our listeners and users at Public want to know all the details and rely on your expertise. Thanks for being here today.
I'll be there. Thanks for having me.